My name is Ainsley. I'm 35 years old, and I'm standing in the boardroom doorway watching my entire family celebrate voting me out as CEO of the company I built into a billion-dollar empire. They're toasting with champagne, already dividing up my responsibilities like vultures over a carcass. My brother Nathan sits smugly in my chair while my stepmother Victoria has already moved into my office. The lawyer enters with termination papers, but I'm clutching a folder nobody's noticed yet. "Congratulations," I say calmly, stepping forward. "You just voted yourselves out of the company." Before we dive into how my own family orchestrated the ultimate betrayal, I want to know where you're watching from today. Are you dealing with family drama in your own business? Hit that like button if you believe family and business should stay separate, and don't forget to subscribe because this story of corporate revenge is about to show you exactly why blood isn't always thicker than water. Trust me, what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty. Morrison Technologies wasn't just a company to me, it was my entire childhood. While other kids played with dolls, I was sitting on my father's lap in board meetings, absorbing every word about profit margins and market strategies. James Morrison, my father, started the company in our garage when I was just 5 years old, soldering circuit boards late into the night while my mother brought him coffee and encouragement. I remember the smell of hot metal and the sound of his determined sighs as he worked to build something from nothing. By the time I was 10, Dad had moved the operation into a small warehouse, and I spent every summer break there, learning the business from the ground up. I worked in shipping, counting inventory until my fingers were numb. I sat with the accountants, fascinated by how numbers could tell stories. I shadowed the engineers, asking endless questions about every component. Dad never treated me like just his daughter. He treated me like his successor, though neither of us knew how soon that transition would come. The company grew steadily through my teenage years, expanding from local contracts to national partnerships. I watched my father transform from a tired engineer into a commanding CEO, his garage startup becoming a respected technology firm. But success brought complications I was too young to fully understand. When I was 20, Dad remarried Victoria, a woman 20 years his junior, who seemed to appear just as the company's valuation crossed $50 million. My brother Nathan, 3 years older than me, had shown little interest in the business until Victoria started whispering in his ear about his rightful place as the eldest child. After completing my MBA at Wharton, I returned to Morrison Technologies as VP of Strategic Development. Dad was grooming me openly now, and the resentment from Nathan became palpable. He'd gotten a degree in marketing from a state school and expected to walk into an executive position, but Dad insisted he start in sales like everyone else. The family dinners became tense affairs, with Victoria constantly advocating for Nathan while subtly undermining my achievements. "Ainsley works so hard," she'd say with a sympathetic smile, "but sometimes I worry she doesn't understand the importance of work-life balance. A woman shouldn't sacrifice everything for career." Then came that horrible morning 5 years ago. Dad collapsed during his morning run, a massive heart attack taking him at just 58 years old. The funeral was a blur of flowers and condolences, but what followed was worse. At the will reading, we discovered Dad had left the company's shares equally divided, 1/3 to me, 1/3 to Nathan, and 1/3 to Victoria. There was also a complex clause about operational control that the lawyer glossed over quickly, saying it was standard language. We were all too grief-stricken to pay attention to the details that would later save everything I'd worked for. The board vote for a new CEO happened 2 weeks after the funeral. I'd assumed Nathan would fight for it, but surprisingly, he nominated me. "Ainsley knows the company best," he said magnanimously. Dad was training her for this. Victoria seconded the motion with tears in her eyes, talking about honoring my father's wishes. Other board members, including Uncle Richard, Aunt Susan, and several longtime executives, voted unanimously. At 30, I became the youngest CEO in our industry, determined to make my father proud. What followed were 5 years of extraordinary growth. I modernized our operations, invested heavily in AI and automation, and secured contracts that tripled our revenue. We went from a respected mid-sized company to an industry leader worth over $1 billion. I worked 18-hour days, traveled constantly, and poured every ounce of my energy into the company. The profits soared, and with them, the dividend checks to my family members grew larger and larger. But money has a way of revealing people's true nature. As the checks grew, so did the family's sense of entitlement. Nathan, who'd been content with his sales director position when profits were modest, suddenly felt he deserved to be executive vice president. Victoria started showing up at the office more frequently, offering suggestions that were thinly veiled criticisms. "Your father would have handled that differently," became her favorite refrain, usually said in front of other executives to undermine my authority. The real trouble started when cousin Bradley joined as family financial advisor. Bradley had always been the golden boy of the family, with his Harvard MBA and his Wall Street pedigree. Victoria had pushed hard for his hiring, arguing that family businesses needed family oversight of finances. Against my better judgment, I agreed, not knowing I was inviting a viper into our nest. Bradley immediately began ingratiating himself with Nathan and Victoria, the three of them forming a tight alliance that excluded me from their after-work drinks and weekend gatherings. Uncle Richard and Aunt Susan, who'd been content to collect their board meeting fees and annual dividends, suddenly became very interested in operational decisions. Richard started questioning every expansion, every new hire, every strategic initiative. "Why rock the boat?" he'd ask. "We're making good money as is." He didn't understand that standing still in technology meant falling behind, but he had a vote on the board, and he was using it more and more to obstruct progress. The first sign of real conspiracy came when I accidentally discovered a meeting I hadn't been invited to. I'd returned to the office late one evening to retrieve a forgotten presentation and found Nathan, Victoria, Bradley, and several other family members huddled in the conference room. They quickly dispersed when they saw me, claiming they were planning a surprise party for my upcoming birthday. But my birthday was 6 months away, and the financial projections still glowing on the screen suggested they were planning something very different. Janet, my executive assistant who'd worked for my father for 15 years, started warning me about rumors circulating through the company. "People are saying Nathan's been promising promotions to anyone who supports him," she told me one morning. "And Victoria's been having lunch with board members, talking about the company's direction." I thanked Janet, but didn't want to believe my own family was plotting against me. Surely they could see how well the company was doing under my leadership. It was during a routine review of corporate documents that I discovered the truth about the ownership structure. Hidden in the legal complexity of my father's estate planning was a dual-class share system that I'd never fully understood. Yes, the economic ownership was split equally between Nathan, Victoria, and me, but the voting shares told a different story. My father, in his wisdom, had created a special class of voting shares that gave me 60% control of the board, regardless of economic ownership. The clause about operational control that we'd ignored at the will reading was actually a sophisticated mechanism to prevent exactly what my family was now attempting. I sat in my office that night, staring at the documents that revealed my father's foresight. He'd seen this coming, had watched his own siblings tear apart his parents' small business over greed and ego. In his own way, he'd protected both me and the company from the family's worst impulses. But knowing I had this power and deciding how to use it were two different things. I could reveal it immediately and shut down whatever plans they were making, but something told me to wait. If they were plotting against me, I needed to know the full extent of their betrayal. So I kept the information secret, locked in my private safe, while I watched and waited for my family to show their true colors. The conspiracy against me began in earnest 6 months before the vote, though I can trace the seeds back to a family barbecue where Nathan had too much to drink and launched into a bitter tirade about certain people thinking they're better than everyone else. Victoria had quickly hushed him, but the damage was done. I'd seen the look exchanged between them, the silent agreement that something needed to be done about the Ainsley problem. Nathan's campaign started subtly, with casual conversations at family gatherings. "Does anyone else think Ainsley's taking too many risks?" he'd ask, his tone concerned rather than accusatory. "I mean, we all want the company to succeed, but this AI expansion seems rushed." He'd plant these seeds of doubt carefully, always framing himself as the worried brother just looking out for everyone's interests. The irony was that the AI division was already showing a 40% return on investment, but Nathan knew most family members didn't bother reading the detailed quarterly reports I sent them. Victoria's approach was more insidious. She became my biggest public champion while simultaneously undermining me in private conversations. At board meetings, she'd praise my dedication and vision, then later pull members aside to express her concerns about my leadership style. "Ainsley's brilliant," she'd whisper, "but sometimes I worry she doesn't value family input enough." James always made decisions with the family in mind. She conveniently forgot that my father had specifically structured the company to prevent family interference, having learned from his own bitter experiences. Bradley's role in the betrayal was perhaps the most calculated. As family financial advisor, he had access to all our financial data and the knowledge to manipulate it. He began creating alternate financial projections that made my strategic decisions appear reckless. The Jakarta expansion, which independent analysts praised as visionary, was reframed in Bradley's reports as a dangerous gamble. He cherry-picked data, used misleading comparisons, and created worst-case scenarios that he presented as likely outcomes. During family meetings, he'd pull out these reports with a concerned expression, saying, "I'm just trying to protect everyone's interests here." The family dinners that had once been pleasant, if occasionally tense, affairs transformed into interrogations. Every Sunday, Victoria would host elaborate meals where my every decision was questioned under the guise of family discussion. "Why did you reject the Hartman Industries offer?" Nathan would ask between courses. "Bradley says they offered 20% above market rate." What he didn't mention was that Hartman had a reputation for acquiring companies, stripping their assets, and destroying their culture. But explaining the nuances of long-term value versus short-term profit to people who only saw dollar signs was becoming exhausting. The Jakarta deal became their rallying cry against me. It was a 10-year partnership with the Indonesian government to provide smart city technology, a deal that would triple our international revenue and establish us as a global player. But it required significant upfront investment and wouldn't show profits for 18 months. To Nathan and his allies, this was evidence of my recklessness. "She's gambling with our inheritance," became the whispered refrain, as if the company was a trust fund rather than a living business that needed to evolve or die. Nathan's promises to other family members were becoming more explicit. Cousin Melissa, whom I'd personally mentored and promoted to senior management, was promised the VP of Operations role if she supported Nathan's bid for CEO. Uncle Richard's incompetent son Troy was guaranteed a director position. Aunt Susan was told her consulting firm would receive exclusive contracts. The corruption was spreading through the family like a virus, each member calculating what they could gain from my downfall. The secret board meetings at Victoria's mansion were where the real planning happened. I learned about them from Mark, our CTO, who'd been invited to one before realizing what was happening. "They wanted to know if I'd stay on if there was a leadership change," he told me quietly. Nathan was there, acting like he was already CEO, making promises about budget increases and new positions. I left as soon as I could. Mark's loyalty was reassuring, but it also confirmed that the conspiracy had reached a critical stage. They weren't just complaining anymore, they were actively planning a coup. The family WhatsApp group that excluded me was another wound, discovered accidentally when Melissa left her phone on my desk. The messages I glimpsed before she snatched it back were illuminating. They ranged from petty complaints about my management style to serious discussions about the future of Morrison Technologies post-Ainsley. The casualness with which they discussed my removal, as if I were an impediment rather than the person who'd tripled their wealth, was staggering. What hurt most was seeing people I'd trusted turn against me for such transparent reasons. Melissa, whom I'd hired fresh from college and nurtured into a talented executive, was swayed by the promise of a title. Uncle Richard, who'd been at my college graduation telling me how proud my father would be, now viewed me as an obstacle to his son's unearned advancement. Even Jennifer from HR, whom I'd considered a friend, was hedging her bets, quietly updating her resume while maintaining a friendly facade. The pressure on my remaining allies was intense. Janet, my assistant, reported being approached multiple times with offers to share information about my schedule and meetings. Thomas, our CFO, was subjected to veiled threats about his job security if he continued supporting my initiatives. The toxic atmosphere was affecting company morale, with employees unsure whether to follow their current CEO or prepare for a new regime. Finding the draft termination letter on the printer was the moment I knew they'd moved from planning to execution. It was a Thursday evening, and I'd stayed late to finish a proposal. The letter, accidentally left by someone careless, outlined the terms of my transition to a consulting role, complete with an insulting severance package and a non-compete clause that would effectively end my career. The signature line was blank, but the document was dated for the following month. They'd already decided my fate. All that remained was the formal vote. That night, I made the decision that would define everything that followed. Instead of confronting them immediately, I would let their plan proceed. I had the documentation about the voting shares safely secured, along with copies of every suspicious email, every manipulated report, and every secret meeting agenda I'd managed to obtain. If my family wanted to play corporate politics, I would show them how the game was really played. But first, I needed to document everything, protect my loyal employees, and ensure that when the moment came to reveal the truth, there would be no room for doubt about who the real leader of Morrison Technologies was. The next morning, I began my own preparations. I met quietly with our corporate lawyers to ensure all documentation was in order. I compiled evidence of Bradley's financial manipulations and Nathan's potential corporate espionage. I made sure the Jakarta deal paperwork was ironclad and couldn't be unwound by new leadership. Most importantly, I reached out to key clients and partners, subtly ensuring their contracts were with Morrison Technologies as an entity, not with any individual executive. If my family wanted to take the company from me, they would find that the company they inherited would be very different from the one they thought they were stealing. The morning of the vote arrived with the kind of crisp clarity that makes everything seem hyper-real. I drove to the office at 5:30, 2 hours before the emergency board meeting Nathan had called. The building was empty except for security, and I used the quiet time to box up my personal items with methodical precision. The photo of Dad and me at my MBA graduation, the lucky pen he'd given me when I became CEO, the small cactus Melissa had gifted me 3 years ago with a note saying, "For someone who makes everything bloom." Each item went into the box with a strange sense of ceremony, as if I was performing last rites for my career. By 7:30, employees were starting to arrive, and I could see the uncertainty in their faces. Word of the emergency board meeting had leaked, and speculation was running wild. Some avoided eye contact, clearly aware of what was coming. Others offered nervous smiles, unsure whether expressing support for their current CEO was politically wise. Janet arrived with coffee and red-rimmed eyes, having figured out what was happening despite my attempts to shield her from the family drama. The boardroom began filling at 8:45. Nathan arrived first, wearing a new suit that probably cost more than most employees' monthly salary. He carried himself with the swagger of assumed victory, already practicing his CEO bearing. Victoria followed, dressed in black as if attending a funeral, perhaps a deliberate choice to mourn the end of my leadership. Her performance of concerned stepmother was Oscar-worthy, complete with subtle glances of sympathy directed my way whenever others were watching. Bradley entered with a leather portfolio full of his manipulated reports, his Harvard class ring catching the light as he shook hands with board members. Uncle Richard and Aunt Susan arrived together, avoiding my gaze like guilty children. Other family board members filed in, Cousin Douglas, who ran a failing restaurant chain, Great-Aunt Bernice, who hadn't attended a meeting in 2 years, and various other relatives who'd emerged from the woodwork as the company's value soared. Each took their seat with an air of historic importance, as if they were about to right some great wrong rather than destroy the leadership that had made them all wealthy. Nathan called the meeting to order with unseemly eagerness, forgetting that as CEO, that was still my prerogative. I let it pass, settling into my usual seat with calm composure. "Thank you all for attending this emergency session," he began, his voice carrying the false gravitas of someone playing a role they'd rehearsed. "We're here to discuss the future leadership of Morrison Technologies and to address concerns about the current direction of the company." His presentation was a masterclass in corporate character assassination dressed up as objective analysis. Using Bradley's manipulated data, he painted a picture of a company in crisis, led by an inexperienced, impulsive CEO who made decisions without consulting family stakeholders. The Jakarta deal was presented as a reckless gamble that could bankrupt the company. My investment in AI technology was characterized as chasing trends rather than sound strategy. Every decision I'd made was reframed through a lens of failure, despite the undeniable fact that profits had tripled under my leadership. "My sister is brilliant," Nathan said with practiced regret, "but brilliance without wisdom is dangerous. She's moved too fast, taken too many risks, and forgotten that this is a family company, not her personal playground." The irony of being lectured about wisdom by someone who'd never successfully managed anything larger than a sales team was not lost on me, but I maintained my silence, taking careful notes as if I were in any other board meeting. Victoria's performance was even more theatrical. She stood slowly, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief, and delivered a speech about family values and my father's legacy that would have moved me if I hadn't known about her secret meetings and whispered campaigns. "James built this company as a family," she said, her voice breaking with fabricated emotion. "But Ainsley has systematically excluded family input, ignored our concerns, and pursued her own agenda without regard for the rest of us. It breaks my heart to say this, but I don't think she's the right person to lead us anymore." The other family members piled on with rehearsed grievances. Richard complained about my refusal to hire his incompetent son. Susan lamented the loss of family atmosphere in the company. Douglas suggested that my focus on technology was abandoning the company's roots, apparently forgetting that we were literally a technology company. Each speech was a variation on the same theme. Ainsley had forgotten family, pursued growth over comfort, and needed to be replaced by someone who understood that family came first, meaning someone who would give them all cushy jobs and bigger dividends. When they finally allowed me to respond, I stood slowly, making eye contact with each board member in turn. My defense was simple and factual. I presented the real numbers. 300% revenue growth, 600% increase in market capitalization, expansion from 3 states to 14 countries. I showed the analyst reports calling us the success story of the decade, and the employee satisfaction surveys showing record-high morale. I reminded them of the families fed by the thousands of jobs we'd created and the communities transformed by our technology. Every decision I've made, I concluded, has been in service of growing this company and honoring my father's vision of excellence. If that threatens those who prefer comfort over achievement, then perhaps we have different definitions of what this company should be. I sat down without emotion, without pleading, without giving them the satisfaction of seeing how their betrayal cut me. If they wanted to destroy what I'd built, they would do so without my tears as a trophy. The vote was called with indecent haste. Nathan could barely contain his smile as board members raised their hands. Richard and Susan voted against me, their hands shooting up like eager students. Bradley voted with a solemn nod, as if performing a grave duty. Douglas, Bernice, and the other family members followed suit. Only Janet, who served as board secretary, and Thomas, our CFO, voted to retain me. The final tally was 7-2, exactly as I'd predicted. The family had spoken, and they'd chosen greed over growth, comfort over competence, blood over business acumen. Nathan's victory speech was everything I expected, pompous, self-congratulatory, and full of promises about returning to family values and sustainable growth, code words for slowing expansion and increasing dividends. He magnanimously offered me a consulting role to ease the transition, the same insulting proposal I'd seen in the draft letter. The salary he mentioned was less than what we paid senior managers, a final humiliation to ensure I knew my place in his new order. The celebration began immediately. Champagne appeared from somewhere, probably prepositioned by Victoria, and family members toasted their victory. Nathan sat in my chair at the head of the table, already discussing office assignments and new positions. Victoria was practically measuring my office for new curtains. The vultures were dividing the spoils before the body was cold, so confident in their victory they didn't notice I hadn't reacted with shock or anger or tears. They were so busy congratulating themselves that they didn't see me pull out my phone and send a single text message, execute phase 2. Security arrived to change my access codes while I was still in the building, a petty move designed to humiliate. Nathan made sure I saw them reprogramming the executive elevator, removing my biometric data from the system. What he didn't know was that I'd already arranged for new access codes with the security chief, who reported directly to the board chairman, a position that would still be mine regardless of the CEO vote. But I played along, accepting the temporary visitor badge with grace. The walk through the office was meant to be my walk of shame. Nathan had clearly spread word of the vote, and small groups of employees clustered in doorways, watching my supposed final journey as CEO. Some looked sympathetic, others calculating, already adjusting their allegiance to the new regime. I maintained my composure, stopping to reassure a few key people with a look or a nod. They would understand soon enough. As I reached the lobby, I turned back to see Nathan watching from the mezzanine, surrounded by family members like a king with his court. He gave me a mock salute, his triumph complete. I smiled back, a genuine smile that clearly puzzled him. In his mind, he'd won everything. In reality, he'd played exactly the game I'd allowed him to play. Tomorrow, he would learn the difference between winning a battle and winning a war. But tonight, let him have his celebration. Let them all toast their victory over the woman who'd made them rich. Tomorrow, they would learn why my father had been so careful about who really controlled Morrison Technologies. The next morning arrived with a thunderstorm that seemed cinematically appropriate for what was about to unfold. I dressed carefully in my sharpest suit, the one I wore for major acquisitions, and arrived at Morrison Technologies flanked by Harrison Wells, my personal attorney, and Sarah Chin, the company's chief corporate counsel. The security guard's eyes widened when he saw us, clearly having received instructions about my changed status, but Sarah simply handed him a document that made him step aside immediately. We took the executive elevator to the top floor, where Nathan had already moved into my office. Through the glass walls, I could see him sitting at my former desk, his feet propped up on the mahogany surface my father had hand-selected 20 years ago. The sight might have angered me if I hadn't been so focused on what was about to happen. The entire family had gathered for what they assumed would be a smooth transition meeting, ready to watch me hand over the final pieces of authority. Nathan's assistant, hired just yesterday apparently, tried to stop us from entering. Sarah brushed past her with the legal authority of someone who knew exactly where power resided. We entered to find the room full of celebrating family members. Nathan had my father's portrait removed already, replaced with a gaudy modern art piece that screamed new money. Victoria sat in the corner chair like a queen mother, while Bradley typed furiously on his laptop, probably already calculating his increased bonuses. Ainsley, Nathan said with false warmth, not bothering to stand. Good of you to come. I thought we might start with the transition timeline. I'll need you to walk me through your current projects, set up meetings with key clients, and, of course, hand over all passwords and confidential documents. His tone was that of a benevolent victor being gracious to the defeated. The others nodded along, already discussing their new roles and responsibilities in my absence. I let him finish his little speech before reaching into my portfolio and withdrawing a manila folder. The same folder I'd been holding yesterday when they voted me out. Before we discuss transitions, I said calmly, I think we need to clarify a few legal matters regarding the structure of Morrison Technologies and who actually has the authority to make leadership decisions. Victoria's eyes narrowed immediately. She had enough experience with legal maneuvering to recognize a threat. What are you talking about, Ainsley? The board voted. It's done. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Her voice carried a warning, but I was past being intimidated by my stepmother's veiled threats. Sarah Chen stepped forward, her presence immediately commanding attention. As chief corporate counsel, she'd been notably absent from yesterday's meeting, a detail the conspirators had overlooked in their eagerness. If I may, she began, opening her own folder, I need to present the board with some critical information about the corporate structure of Morrison Technologies that appears to have been overlooked in yesterday's proceedings. I pulled out the incorporation documents, the ones I discovered months ago, and began reading the relevant sections aloud. According to the amended Articles of Incorporation, filed by James Morrison 5 years before his death, Morrison Technologies operates under a dual-class share structure. Class A shares carry economic rights, dividends, and proceeds from any sale. These were indeed split equally among the heirs. However, Class B shares carry voting rights, and these were distributed very differently. Nathan's smug expression began to falter. His feet came off the desk as he leaned forward, trying to process what I was saying. What are you talking about? We all have equal shares. The will was clear. But his voice had lost its confident edge, replaced by the first hint of panic. Equal economic shares, yes, Harrison Wells interjected, his deep baritone filling the room with authority. But not equal voting shares. Mr. Morrison created a sophisticated structure where Ms. Ainsley Morrison holds 60% of Class B voting shares, giving her controlling interest in all board decisions, including the appointment and removal of board members themselves. The room erupted. Victoria shot to her feet, her carefully composed facade cracking. That's impossible. I saw the will. I was there. But even as she spoke, I could see her mind racing, remembering the complex legal language she'd dismissed as standard boilerplate, the clauses about operational control we'd all overlooked in our grief. Bradley had gone pale, his laptop forgotten as he stared at the documents I was now passing around the room. Each page was tagged and annotated, showing clearly how the voting structure worked. His financial manipulations, his carefully crafted reports designed to undermine me, all of it had been pointless. He'd been playing checkers while I'd been playing chess with a board my father had set up years ago. This has to be illegal, Richard sputtered, his face red with indignation. You can't hide something like this. We voted. The board made a decision. His outrage would have been more convincing if he hadn't spent the last 6 months plotting against me in secret meetings. Sarah's response was clinically professional. Everything was disclosed in the public filings, available for anyone who chose to review them. The structure is not only legal, but quite common in companies where founders want to ensure stable leadership. Ms. Morrison chose not to exercise her controlling vote in yesterday's meeting to see how board members would act when they believed they had free choice. The results were illuminating. I let that sink in before continuing. Every vote you took yesterday, every decision you made, was advisory at best. I wanted to see who would stand by merit and who would choose nepotism. I wanted to know which family members saw Morrison Technologies as a business to grow and which saw it as a piggy bank to raid. My voice remained calm, but each word landed like a hammer blow. Nathan had found his voice again, though it cracked with desperation. You planned this. You let us vote you out knowing it meant nothing. You manipulated us. The irony of him accusing me of manipulation after 6 months of his conspiracy was almost amusing, but I maintained my professional composure. I documented everything, I said simply. Every secret meeting at Victoria's house. Every manipulated financial report Bradley created. Every promise you made to hire unqualified family members in exchange for their votes. Every conversation where you discussed dividing up the company like a Thanksgiving turkey. I have recordings, emails, text messages, and sworn affidavits from employees you tried to corrupt. At the mention of documentation, Bradley physically recoiled. His financial manipulations weren't just unethical, some of them bordered on fraud. Victoria's face had gone from red to white as she realized the implications. Their coup hadn't just failed, they'd expose themselves to potential legal consequences. As of this morning, I continued, I've exercised my voting rights to restructure the board. Richard, Susan, Douglas, and Bernice, your board positions are terminated immediately. Your economic shares remain intact, but you no longer have any say in company operations. Nathan, your termination as sales director is effective immediately for cause, specifically corporate espionage and breach of fiduciary duty. The evidence has been forwarded to the appropriate authorities. The security team I'd arranged entered the room on cue, professional and courteous, but clearly there to enforce the new order. These weren't the regular building security, but a specialized corporate team trained in handling executive transitions. Their presence made it clear this wasn't a negotiation. You can't do this, Victoria whispered, but her protest lacked conviction. She knew enough about corporate law to recognize when she was beaten. James wouldn't have wanted this. Family was everything to him. I allowed myself a bitter smile. My father learned the hard way what family could do to a business. His own siblings destroyed his parents' company fighting over control. So yes, family was everything to him, which is why he made sure the family business would survive the family. He left you all wealthy, but he left me in control. Because he knew the difference between sharing wealth and sharing power. The meeting devolved into chaos. Threats of lawsuits flew, accusations were hurled, and more than one family member had to be physically restrained from lunging at me. Through it all, I remained seated, calm, and unmoved. Sarah and Harrison handled the legal challenges with practiced ease, citing precedent and statute, making it clear that any legal challenge would be both futile and expensive. As the security team began escorting people out, I made one final announcement. For those family members who weren't part of this conspiracy, your positions and shares remain unchanged. For those who participated, you have a choice. Accept the termination with your economic shares intact, or fight it and risk losing everything when the full extent of your actions is revealed in court. Bradley, given the evidence of embezzlement we've uncovered, you don't get that choice. The authorities are already waiting downstairs. The mass exodus that followed was unlike anything Morrison Technologies had ever seen. Family members who'd strutted in like conquering heroes shuffled out like defeated soldiers. Nathan had to be almost carried out, his legs seemingly unable to support the weight of his shattered ambitions. Victoria left with her head high, but I could see the calculation in her eyes, already trying to figure out her next move. As the room emptied, I moved to the window, looking out at the city my father and I had helped transform with our technology. Janet appeared at my side, tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of relief. "Your father would be so proud," she said softly. "He always knew this day might come. He told me once that the hardest part of success wasn't building something great, but protecting it from those who would tear it down out of greed." I nodded, feeling the weight of victory, which was somehow heavier than the anticipation of defeat. "The company is safe now," I said. "But the family—" I trailed off, knowing that what I'd done today, necessary as it was, had shattered relationships that could never be repaired. "The family will survive," Janet said firmly. "The question is whether they'll learn from this, or spend the rest of their lives bitter about it." With the boardroom cleared and my authority reestablished, I moved swiftly to implement the restructuring plan I'd been developing for months. Sarah and Harrison remained with me as I called in my senior leadership team, the ones who'd stayed loyal despite the pressure and promises from the other side. Mark, our CTO, arrived first, his relief palpable. Thomas, the CFO, brought with him a team of forensic accountants who'd been working secretly on my behalf. "Phase 3 begins now," I announced, pulling up the presentation I'd prepared for this moment. The screen filled with an organizational chart that would reshape Morrison Technologies for the next generation. We're not just undoing the damage they tried to inflict. We're going to build something they couldn't even imagine. The forensic audit results were damning. Bradley's embezzlement was more extensive than even I had suspected. Over $2.8 million had been siphoned off through fake consulting fees, inflated expense reports, and kickbacks from vendors he'd personally approved. The accountants had traced every transaction, built an airtight case that would hold up in any court. But the financial theft was just the tip of the iceberg. Nathan's corporate espionage was equally shocking. We'd found evidence of 3 separate attempts to sell our proprietary AI algorithms to competitors. His sales trips to Silicon Valley hadn't been about drumming up business for Morrison Technologies. They'd been auditions for positions at rival firms, with our trade secrets as his resume. The emails we'd recovered showed him promising to bring key employees and client lists with him, a betrayal that went beyond family drama into criminal territory. Victoria's sins were more subtle, but no less serious. She'd been in negotiations with a Chinese technology firm, offering to facilitate a hostile takeover from within. The promises she'd made in exchange for a massive payout included not just inside information, but active sabotage of our defense contracts. She'd been playing a longer game than anyone realized, positioning herself to profit from the company's destruction rather than its success. As we reviewed each revelation, I had security bring in the remaining conspirators one by one. Bradley arrived in handcuffs, having been arrested in the parking garage. The federal agents I'd been working with had timed his arrest perfectly, ensuring maximum visibility to send a message to anyone else who might consider stealing from the company. His Harvard arrogance had evaporated entirely, replaced by the panicked look of a man realizing his life was over. $2.8 million, I said, sliding the audit report across the table to him. That's grand larceny, wire fraud, and embezzlement. Your lawyer can review the evidence, but I'll save you the suspense. We have everything. Every transaction, every forged document, every offshore account. You're looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Bradley broke down completely, blubbering about pressure from Victoria and Nathan, about expectations and lifestyle maintenance. His excuses were pathetic, the whining of a privileged man who'd never faced real consequences before. I felt no sympathy. He'd stolen money that could have funded research, created jobs, or improved our products. His greed had real victims, even if he couldn't see them. Nathan's confrontation was more volatile. He arrived with a lawyer, apparently expecting to negotiate. When presented with the evidence of his corporate espionage, he launched into a tirade about being undervalued and overlooked. "You got everything," he shouted. Dad's attention, the company, the success. What was I supposed to do? Just watch from the sidelines while my little sister played CEO. You were supposed to earn your position, I replied coldly. You were offered every opportunity to advance based on merit. Instead, you chose to betray not just me but every employee who depends on this company for their livelihood. You tried to sell out thousands of jobs for your personal gain. The security footage of him photographing confidential documents played on the screen behind me, making his denials pointless. The federal prosecutor who'd joined us made it clear that Nathan's choices were limited. Cooperate fully, testify against his co-conspirators, and possibly avoid jail time, or fight the charges and face a decade in prison. The man who'd strutted into my office yesterday morning left in tears, his dreams of corporate leadership replaced by the reality of criminal prosecution. Victoria's downfall was perhaps the most satisfying. She'd always prided herself on being the smartest person in the room, the master manipulator who could play everyone like puppets. But when confronted with the evidence of her foreign negotiations, her cool facade finally cracked completely. The emails with the Chinese firm were explicit about her willingness to compromise national security for personal gain. "This is entrapment," she hissed, but her lawyer was already advising her to remain silent. The State Department had become involved due to the defense contract implications, elevating her crimes beyond simple corporate malfeasance. She'd crossed lines that couldn't be uncrossed, all for the promise of a 9-figure payout that would now never come. The other family members were given a simpler choice. Those who'd participated in the conspiracy could accept buyouts at fair market value and sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements, or they could retain their shares, but face personal lawsuits for breach of fiduciary duty. Most took the buyouts, preferring cash in hand to ongoing association with a company they'd tried to destroy. Uncle Richard tried to bluster about fighting back until we presented evidence of 5 years of tax fraud he'd been committing using company resources. His son Troy's guaranteed position evaporated along with Richard's seat on the board. They left with enough money to live comfortably, but not enough to maintain the lavish lifestyle they'd grown accustomed to. Cousin Melissa's termination hit differently. Unlike the others driven purely by greed, she'd been motivated by ambition, misguided but understandable. "I trained you," I said, unable to keep the hurt from my voice. "I saw potential in you that you didn't see in yourself. And you repaid that by conspiring against me for a title you hadn't earned yet." Her tears seemed genuine as she apologized, but trust once broken couldn't be easily repaired. I gave her a more generous severance than required and a neutral reference, but made it clear she would never work at Morrison Technologies again. She'd have to build her career elsewhere, without the mentorship and opportunities I'd provided. As the day progressed, the company transformation accelerated. New board members were introduced, industry leaders with no family connections who brought expertise and objectivity. The governance structure was overhauled to prevent any future coup attempts. Employee stock options were expanded, giving our workforce a real stake in the success they were creating. The Jakarta deal, which Nathan had tried to paint as reckless, was signed with even better terms than originally negotiated. Our partners had been watching the leadership drama with concern, but my swift resolution and the removal of obstructionist board members actually strengthened their confidence. The AI division received additional funding, positioning us to dominate the emerging market. By evening, Morrison Technologies had been transformed from a family business vulnerable to nepotism and greed into a professional corporation with world-class governance. The stock price, which had dipped during rumors of leadership instability, soared to record highs as analysts praised the decisive action and clear vision for the future. Standing in my office, now properly mine again, I looked at the portrait of my father I'd rehung where Nathan's garish art had briefly resided. "You saw this coming," I said quietly. "You knew what they were capable of, and you protected me and the company. I hope I've made you proud." Janet knocked and entered with a bottle of champagne, the same brand the conspirators had been drinking yesterday when they thought they'd won. "The senior staff wants to toast their CEO," she said. "The real one." I smiled, feeling the weight of the day lifting slightly. Tomorrow there would be more work, more challenges, and the inevitable fallout from today's actions. But tonight, we would celebrate not just victory but vindication. The company was stronger, the leadership was unified, and the future was ours to build without the dead weight of entitled family members holding us back. 3 months after the failed coup, our family's complete dissolution played out like a Shakespearean tragedy across the social circles of our city. The annual Christmas dinner at Victoria's mansion, once the crown jewel of our family calendar, became ground zero for the final implosion. I hadn't planned to attend, but Aunt Martha, one of the few relatives who'd remained neutral, convinced me that staying away would let them paint me as the villain who destroyed the family. I arrived to find a house that looked the same but felt entirely different. The usual elaborate decorations were there, but they seemed to mock the grimness of the gathered family members. Nathan stood by the bar, drinking heavily, his designer clothes replaced by off-the-rack business casual. His position at a small marketing firm in the suburbs was a spectacular fall from grace, and everyone knew it. The confident swagger was gone, replaced by the bitter slouch of a man who'd gambled everything and lost. Victoria still tried to maintain her society queen persona, but the cracks showed everywhere. Her designer dress was last season's, her jewelry notably modest compared to her usual display. The social invitations had dried up once word spread about her attempted corporate betrayal. Being publicly accused of trying to sell out to foreign interests had made her radioactive in the circles she'd once dominated. She greeted me with icy politeness, her eyes promising retribution she no longer had the power to deliver. Bradley's absence was conspicuous. He was out on bail, his assets frozen, preparing for a trial that would likely send him to federal prison for a decade. His wife had filed for divorce within a week of his arrest, taking their children back to her family in Boston. The golden boy of the family was now just another white-collar criminal awaiting judgment, his Harvard MBA worthless in a federal penitentiary. The dinner conversation was stilted, punctuated by awkward silences and bitter undertones. When Uncle Richard tried to make small talk about business, mentioning an opportunity he was pursuing, Aunt Susan cut him off with a harsh laugh. "What opportunity? Who's going to do business with you now? Everyone knows what you tried to do." Their marriage, already strained, was clearly approaching its breaking point. The real explosion came when Cousin Douglas, drunk and bitter about his buyout, stood up and launched into a toast. "To family," he slurred, raising his glass mockingly. "To the family that built Morrison Technologies." Oh wait, that was just James. "To the family that grew Morrison Technologies." Oh right, that was just Ainsley. "To the family that tried to steal Morrison Technologies." Now that was all of us. The room erupted. Victoria threw her wine glass, Nathan lunged at Douglas, and Richard began screaming about lawsuits and defamation. Within minutes, the elegant dining room had descended into chaos. Crystal shattered, voices raised in accusations and counter-accusations, years of resentment boiling over in an ugly display of what we'd become. I left quietly during the melee, but not before overhearing Melissa in the kitchen, crying on the phone. She'd been rejected from 5 jobs in the past month, each potential employer mysteriously losing interest after checking her references. The neutral reference I'd provided was professional, but the gap in her resume and the circumstances of her departure were impossible to hide. She was learning that betrayal had consequences that lasted long after the moment of choice. Over the following weeks, the family fragmentation accelerated. Nathan's wife, Claire, filed for separation after discovering the extent of his corporate espionage. She'd stood by him through the professional humiliation, but learning he'd risked federal charges and their children's future for his ego was too much. She took the kids and moved back to her parents in Seattle, leaving Nathan alone in an apartment he could barely afford. Victoria's situation grew increasingly desperate. The foreign company she'd been negotiating with had disappeared at the first sign of federal investigation, leaving her exposed with no powerful allies. Her attempts to contest my father's will were dismissed by every lawyer she consulted. The trust fund he'd left her was comfortable but not lavish, forcing her to sell the mansion and downsize to a condo that probably felt like a prison after years of luxury. The IRS investigation into Richard that I'd flagged expanded beyond what anyone expected. They found decades of tax evasion, unreported income, and fraudulent deductions. His consulting firm, already struggling without Morrison Technologies contracts, collapsed entirely. Susan filed for divorce and moved in with her sister, publicly blaming Richard for ruining their comfortable retirement. Their son Troy, denied his promised corporate position, was working at a car dealership and posting bitter rants on social media about corporate nepotism, apparently missing the irony entirely. The younger generation of cousins split into 2 camps. Some, like Douglas and Melissa, remained bitter and continued to paint me as the villain who destroyed the family. They formed their own little support group of failed conspirators, meeting in dive bars to complain about their reduced circumstances and plot impossible comebacks. But others reached out with genuine contrition. Cousin Emma, fresh out of college, sent a heartfelt letter apologizing for her parents' actions and asking if she could still apply for the internship program. Her younger brother David, a computer science major, expressed similar sentiments. They represented hope that not all of the family was irredeemably corrupted by greed. I established a strict policy for family members seeking employment at Morrison Technologies. They could apply like any other candidate with no special consideration given for the family name. If anything, they would need to prove themselves more thoroughly, demonstrating both competence and integrity. Emma eventually earned her position through merit, becoming a vocal advocate for professional standards over family connections. The death threat started after Bradley's trial began and the full extent of the family's crimes became public. Anonymous messages promising retribution for destroying the family appeared regularly. After my security team discovered evidence of tampering with my car's brakes, a full investigation revealed Cousin Douglas as the culprit. His arrest for attempted murder was the final nail in the family's coffin, proving that some had moved beyond greed into genuine evil. Nathan's complete breakdown came 6 months after the coup. He showed up at my office, drunk and disheveled, begging for another chance. Security intercepted him in the lobby, but I watched on the monitors as he ranted about being sorry, about father loving me more, about deserving better than a cubicle in a suburban office park. The man who'd tried to steal my company was reduced to a pathetic figure screaming in a marble lobby, his fall from grace complete. Some family members simply disappeared. Aunt Bernice moved to Florida without a forwarding address. Cousin Robert relocated to Europe, supposedly for a fresh start, but more likely to avoid association with the family name. Others changed their surnames entirely, trying to distance themselves from the scandal that had made Morrison a toxic name in business circles. The final family gathering was a funeral. Great-Uncle Louis, who'd stayed neutral throughout the conflict, passed away peacefully. The service was sparsely attended, with family members clustering in separate groups, avoiding eye contact. Victoria sat alone in the back, her designer sunglasses failing to hide her tears. Nathan didn't even show up. The minister spoke about family bonds and forgiveness, words that rang hollow in a chapel filled with people who'd betrayed each other for money. After the service, Martha pulled me aside. "Your father would be heartbroken to see this," she said sadly. "He wanted the family to prosper together." I looked around at the scattered remnants of what had once been a close-knit clan. He would be heartbroken, I agreed. But he also knew this was possible. That's why he protected the company from the family. He chose preservation over unity because he understood that sometimes those are mutually exclusive. 1 year after the failed coup, Morrison Technologies stood as a testament to what could be achieved when merit trumped nepotism and vision overcame greed. The company valuation had reached $3 billion, driven by the Jakarta expansion's massive success and our AI division's breakthrough products. The magazine covers came fast and frequently. Fortune dubbed me the CEO who saved her company from her family, while the Wall Street Journal ran a feature series on corporate governance lessons from our transformation. I sat in my father's old study, now mine, reading through the latest analyst reports while rain drummed against the windows. The house felt different these days, smaller somehow despite its size, empty of the family gatherings that once filled its rooms. But there was peace in the solitude, a clarity that came from no longer navigating the minefield of family politics and hidden agendas. James Morrison Jr., my father's best friend and former college roommate, visited on the anniversary of the coup. He'd been abroad during the drama but had followed it closely. Over whiskey in the study, he revealed truths about my father I'd never known. "Your dad went through something similar with his siblings," he said, staring into his glass. His brother tried to force him out of his first company. His sister sold proprietary information to competitors. It nearly broke him, not the business betrayal, but the personal one. The parallels were eerie. My father had built his first successful company in his 20s, only to have his siblings tear it apart through greed and incompetence. He'd walked away with almost nothing, starting over with Morrison Technologies and the hard-won knowledge that family and business were a dangerous combination. He used to say that blood might be thicker than water, but money dissolves both, James continued. That's why he structured things the way he did. He wasn't protecting the company from you, Ainsley. He was protecting you from them. Understanding my father's motivations brought a bittersweet comfort. The safeguards he'd built weren't just about preserving wealth, but about preventing the kind of soul-destroying family warfare he'd experienced. He'd succeeded in keeping the company intact, but at the cost of the family unity he'd also valued. It was a trade-off he deemed necessary, and events had proven him right. 6 months into the new era, Nathan reached out through intermediaries. He'd been in therapy, confronting the toxic mixture of entitlement and insecurity that had driven his actions. His letter was different from the drunken rambling at our office. This time, he took full responsibility, acknowledging not just the attempted theft, but the years of resentment that had poisoned our relationship. He wasn't asking for his old position back or any special treatment. He was asking for the chance to prove he could be better. I met him at a neutral location, a quiet restaurant where we'd once celebrated his college graduation. The man across from me looked older, humbled by his fall from grace. The therapy had helped him understand that his anger at me had really been anger at himself for not living up to our father's legacy. "I spent so much time resenting you for being what Dad wanted," he said quietly, "that I never tried to become someone worthy of respect on my own merits." The conversation was difficult but necessary. I couldn't offer him a position at Morrison Technologies immediately. The betrayal was too fresh, the legal implications too serious. But I could offer him a path forward. If he spent 2 years proving himself elsewhere, building a legitimate track record without trading on the Morrison name, I would consider him for a position based solely on his achievements. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it was a chance for redemption. Victoria's path was different. She'd fled to Florida after the last disastrous family gathering, living quietly on the trust fund my father had left her. There were no apologies from her, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. She'd simply vanished from our lives, a ghost of ambition and manipulation. Occasionally, mutual acquaintances would mention seeing her at charity events, still playing the grieving widow, still painting herself as a victim of ungrateful stepchildren. Some people, I realized, were incapable of growth. Bradley's story served as a cautionary tale throughout the business world. His conviction on multiple federal charges resulted in an 8-year sentence, with millions in restitution owed. His fall from Harvard-educated financial advisor to federal prisoner became a case study in business schools about the dangers of insider fraud. His wife had remarried, his children taking their stepfather's name, erasing Bradley from their lives as thoroughly as he'd been erased from the company he'd plundered. The younger generation of the family showed more promise. Emma had thrived in her internship, earning a full-time position through exceptional performance. She became a vocal advocate within the company for merit-based advancement, often telling her story of initial entitlement followed by genuine achievement. Her brother David joined the AI division after graduating summa cum laude, bringing fresh ideas and a work ethic that impressed even our most demanding engineers. These success stories led me to establish the Morrison Foundation, focused on helping family businesses navigate succession challenges. We provided resources, counseling, and structural advice to prevent the kind of implosion that had destroyed our family. The Foundation's work became my way of honoring my father's memory while helping others avoid our fate. If our family's destruction could serve as a lesson that saved others, perhaps it hadn't been entirely in vain. The company culture had transformed completely. Without the specter of nepotism and family politics, employees felt empowered to take risks, propose innovations, and advance based on merit. Our retention rate soared, and we became known as one of the best places to work in tech. The Jakarta project had expanded into a Pan-Asian initiative, establishing Morrison Technologies as a global leader in smart city solutions. The AI division's breakthroughs in machine learning were revolutionizing industries from healthcare to transportation. Standing in my office on a clear December morning, exactly 1 year after the coup attempt, I reflected on the journey. The city sprawled below, many of its systems now running on Morrison technology. My assistant knocked and entered with coffee and the morning reports. Janet had postponed retirement, saying she wanted to see where this new chapter led. Her loyalty through everything had been a beacon of hope during dark times. "Your 10 o'clock is here," she said, then paused. "It's Nathan. He's early." I'd agreed to meet him to discuss his progress. He'd spent the year working for a nonprofit, using his sales skills to raise funds for educational technology in underserved communities. No corporate espionage, no shortcuts, just honest work for a worthy cause. It was more than I'd expected, suggesting real change was possible. The meeting with Nathan was cautiously optimistic. He presented his achievements without embellishment, showed letters of recommendation from his nonprofit colleagues, and outlined his vision for contributing to Morrison Technologies' new social responsibility division. He'd identified a role where his skills could add value without threatening existing hierarchies. More importantly, He understood that any position would be earned and subject to the same performance standards as any employee. "I'm not the same person who sat in your chair and put his feet on Dad's desk," he said as the meeting concluded. "That person was an entitled fool who thought blood meant more than merit. I can't undo what I did, but I can be better going forward. All I'm asking for is the chance to prove it through actions, not words." I approved a 6-month trial position with clear metrics and regular reviews. It was a risk, but calculated and contained. The company was strong enough now to withstand any individual's failure, and perhaps demonstrating that redemption was possible would help heal some of the wounds our family had inflicted on itself. The final entry in this chapter came from an unexpected source. A letter arrived from Switzerland, where cousin Robert had relocated. He'd started his own technology firm, inspired by Morrison technologies, but determined to build something on his own merits. His note was brief but poignant. "Thank you for showing us the cost of greed and the value of integrity. Some lessons can only be learned through loss. I hope someday to build something worthy of the Morrison name, earned rather than inherited." As the sun set over the city my father and I had helped transform, I made peace with being alone at the top. The family that had once gathered for holidays and celebrations was scattered, some in prison, some in exile, some slowly earning their way back. But in place of those blood ties, I'd built something stronger, a network of competent, ethical professionals who shared a vision for what Morrison Technologies could achieve. The business was thriving precisely because I'd chosen competence over blood, merit over birthright. My father had seen this coming, had prepared for it, and had trusted me to make the hard choices when the time came. The family might never fully recover, but the company would endure and grow, a testament to the principle that in business, as in life, integrity matters more than inheritance. Looking at his photograph one last time before leaving for the evening, I whispered the words I knew he'd understand. "The company is safe, Dad. The legacy endures. And sometimes, protecting what you've built means standing alone." The sacrifice had been great, but the alternative would have been catastrophic. In choosing the company over the family, I'd saved what could be saved and accepted the loss of what couldn't. It was, in the end, the only choice that honored everything he'd taught me. What would you have done in my position? Could you have chosen the company over family, knowing it meant destroying relationships that could never be repaired? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let me know if you've ever faced a similar choice between family loyalty and doing what's right. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life corporate dramas. Share this video with anyone struggling with family business dynamics. They might find strength in knowing they're not alone. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and remember, sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that save us from ourselves.